Well, you're very welcome to an inaugural edition of Counterpoint in our new studios in Dublin. We've moved up in the world, and we have a very interesting lineup this evening. I have Michael McCarthy here to my right, coming in from Galway, well-known social media contributor. Nick Delehanty is with us. He's coming in. He's away in Europe at the moment, and he's coming in from abroad. Thank you very much, Nick. And we have Uberboyo, who'll be well known to many of those also on social media, who's particularly strong in the whole psychology side of what's going on, the Zeitgeist, or whatever way you want to call it. So you're very welcome to this edition of Counterpoint. I'm going to try and get as much as I can out of the guests that are here in this discussion. We're going to go straight in and talk about what's going on with regards to the biggest issue really facing Ireland today, which is, of course, migration. And just to outline a little sketch on that, I've been looking at this myself in the run-up to this discussion. We've had since over the last 5 years, since 2020, roughly around 520,000 have come into the country. A large number of that, of course, are legitimate here with working permits, and of course the returning Irish. But roughly 36% of that number, about 182,000, is coming in from refugees and asylum seekers, and of course the large numbers that came in from Ukraine under the special arrangements in Europe on kind of temporary protection directive. But when you whittle all that back, what you end up with is of the 182,000 that are in here, shall we say, in an unorthodox manner. 40% of those, that's 72,000, are coming in from the general area of asylum seekers and refugees. And we already know that a large majority of those are actually economic migrants rather than real asylum seekers and refugees. I do know, because I went to check it out in preparation for this discussion, that the Gardaí Síochána themselves are privately very concerned about what's going on. Officially they're not. Privately they're very concerned because they've no intelligence at all on what's coming into the country. And we can also tell from the European experience that there are very significant problems in trying to get this matter resolved. It looks more like a damage limitation exercise than anything else at the moment in many European countries. So we'll probably get a little bit into that. But anyway, look, just to throw it open to my guests, I just wanted to ask them really about an organisation called the International Organisation for Migration, which is part of the UN. And the Irish ambassador towards Ethiopia was visiting this organisation in Ethiopia quite recently. Have a look at this. So here we have the Irish ambassador, Olivia Leslie, in a recent tweet. There she is over in Ethiopia, promoting immigration into Ireland, obviously subject to certain terms and conditions. And you might say, well, who is the IOM? Well, I didn't know myself until I started to prepare for this discussion. The International Organisation for Migration is part of the UN. It has a budget of about 4 billion a year. It has around 100 offices throughout the world, including in Ireland and Baggot Street. It has about 22,000 staff. About $500 million of its budget is coming from the EU, Germany, as well as the EU itself. A large proportion is also coming from the United States and many other countries throughout the world. So this migration industry is a massive global business. They fund then through their budget the NGOs. The NGOs swarm around the national parliaments, especially in Ireland. That's part of the stakeholder capitalism model, which is being promulgated by the World Economic Forum for many years, especially by Klaus Schwab, whose mentor for 18 years and eulogised on his website was our own Peter Sutherland, former chairman of Goldman Sachs, and who in 2012 was over preaching to the House of Lords in the UK why there should be complete open borders in Europe. And what we do know from the data, especially Danish data and data in other countries, is that 45% of the migrants who come in have very poor levels of education and find it very, very difficult to integrate and assimilate into a culture, and therefore become a burden on the social welfare system. So that's it just by way of background. We have another data head in here as well, which is Nick Delehanty. I want to get to you, Nick, first, if I may, and to ask you about what your latest findings are in your investigations into the domestic industry which has sprung up around the building of IPAS centres and generating income.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, Eddie. Look, I just put in a lot of time trying to shed light into what's happening, and over the last few weeks I've been focusing on Monaghan and the levels of of unrest that's going on in towns like Carrickmacross and Monaghan Town and maybe Donegal and other border counties as well. And, you know, when you dig into it, you realize that there are just so many well-connected families, high-profile GA personalities that are making millions and millions of euros from all of this. And like, you know, a lot of people, I tried to stick just with money to, you know, follow the money. I try not to get too lost in, you know, the who, the what, you know, the who's coming in, what's going on with them. Like just simply sticking with how much this is costing the taxpayer. It is absolutely ridiculous the amount of money we're spending on this. And you know, the argument I consistently make is that this is all coming from the Department of Children, and yet we have the highest childcare costs in the world. I'm pretty sure someone showed me a study there during the week that's saying we have the highest in the world. And you know, so like, why are we doing all this? Like, what's the point of a country? What's the point of a nation if it's not to, you know, promote families? Like that should be the number one thing. And we should be encouraging Irish people to have families and making it easier for them. So that's my whole thing. And you know, even for saying that, you're labeled far right, anti-immigrant, all these mad stuff. So we just have a very you know, nervous kind of political class at the moment who are afraid to call this stuff out. The last thing most recent thing I was doing this week was I was meant to have a talk in UCD, and it was with Breaking Point, which is a kind of new open forum discussion. The whole thing is about having conversations. And the title of the night was, "Is Ireland Safe?" You know, pretty like, is Ireland safe? And we had guests, you know, 4 speakers. One of them was a professor in UCD for philosophy. His name's Tim Crowley. One was Ben Scallon. I was the other person, and Theo McDonald was the other. And the UCD Student Union shut us down. We weren't allowed to have the talk on campus. And so, you know, when you just that's what you're dealing with. Like, if we can't have these conversations, then what are we at? So that's why I'm very thankful for you, Eddie, because you've given up your time and put in so much effort, and you know, you're creating this studio, trying to get this new podcast out there. And that's what's needed. We, you know, what I say is radical candor. We just need really upfront, frank conversations. So thank you, Eddie.
Well, thanks, Nick, for saying that. Uberboyo, if I could come to you, you're coming in from the United States at the moment, I know. I just wanted to ask you about, you know, like this time last year, as you probably are aware, you know, the Dáil met. Every single independent TD was quite clear on the instructions they were given by the citizens of this country, which was that under no circumstances should we join the EU Migration Pact. The Danes were scratching their heads in wonder because they had the same option under the Lisbon Treaty not to join it. And they've had they're probably the only successful outcome of migration in Europe is in Denmark. They only admit about 5,000 a year now, and it takes about 5 years to become a citizen. So they finally got a grip on it. We went the diametric opposite. Every single TD for Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and the Greens voted that we should join the EU Migration Pact. I mean, how do you account for that?
So this is, it can make you actually quite pessimistic as a nationalist, because you're dealing with the greed within the Irish people. And I think Nick Delehanty has been exceptional at pointing this out. He is someone who has sat down like a classic liberal journalist. Ironically, he's obviously getting accused of being some maniac, but he's sitting down there with his cigarettes late at night. And I don't know, do you smoke, by the way? And just like following the money, finding out what is going on. And you see that there's lots of people in who have property and stuff like that. And these people get these they get offered these contracts, and they say to themselves, wow, I'm going to make a lot of cash. I'm going to do this. I'm going to become a multimillionaire. I'm going to retire down into Spain. There's copious stories that we could specifically go through on this. But the big issue is that these contracts don't come from anywhere. They don't just like pop up randomly out of the sky. They're not just something that is happening kind of haphazard, if you so will. There is obviously a project getting put into place. And this is the thing that people obviously get a little bit afraid about talking about. But there is certainly a system put into place to try encourage this migration with heavy incentives, financial incentives specifically. And you can see this littered across various documents like Project Syndicate 2013 with George Soros. and Peter Sunderland, who had been working on it for a couple of years before this, and obviously even declarations about the macro problem from the UN, which is that our populations, our birth rates are plummeting in the West. And so what we need to do, this is as far back as the year 2000, is we need to begin to replace our population in order to keep the population up, because if the population drops, then the economy falls apart. And then what happens is we can't keep our GDP up, and then everybody goes broke. And I'm giving them the best credence I can possibly give them here, putting in no evil motivations, but pointing out just that this stuff has been thought through and put together as a very high level system that they wanted to put into place. And so an awful lot of the people who are, I guess you could say, getting the dollar signs in their eyes and building these iPass centers and all that, these people are just driven by money. They're kind of not really thinking about it in that type of level. They're not really conducting a plan. They're actually at the receiving end of structures and systems. And then there's been people who've been thinking about this for decades, who've been saying, all right, this is something that needs to happen. The point of our culture is going to be this. Now, if you think about this, if you could move it back into history to get some context, think about like ancient Europe when the Pope runs around and says, we need to have a crusade to get Jerusalem back. He creates this grand crusade political project for all of Europe that gets all the people to focus on turning Europe into this militant force that goes down into the Middle East. And so what's really maybe kind of like bleak about our time is that our crusade of our time, which our politicians and the high-level thinkers and our popes, if you so will, what they're doing is their whole goal is to make sure that we don't have a GDP collapse. So they're going to do replacement migration as a consequence. And so we're all waking up in the middle of this context and us saying to ourselves, oh dear, why is this happening? What's going on? We see obviously the effect that, like Nick points out, that he sometimes maybe gets frustrated where people try to frame it as like, you just don't like foreigners or something like this. But really they're like the strange people coming in are literally just the very low level of this stuff. And a lot of them are incentivized to make their lives better. But the level above that then is iPass centers. And then the level above that are like grand political structures, financiering, and very, very clever systems put into place that you can study and all these type of things. So the big problem for a lot of us in Ireland is that it's hard for people to quickly catch up with that and understand that's the situation and really drill that into their heads, that being like, this is the reality that's happening. And then you're in a scary position if you say, what if this project and plan is bad?
But Michael, isn't that the point though, that I mean, you're very much jumping in on bringing the live video clips and you're doing very good commentary across it. But I mean, firstly, that whole economic argument is highly questionable. Now with the arrival of AI and robotics and all the rest of it, the population collapse argument. And of course, the other argument, which doesn't stand up either, is that the quality of the migration coming into Europe is actually in a position where it's destroying countries. It's destroying Sweden. It's destroying Germany. They're saying, these are their words themselves. In France, about 25% of the French population will be Islamic by 2050. It's already at 13%.
There's a statistic out there last day. Brussels, Belgium. I think it's 84% of the population under 18 aren't Belgian in Brussels, which is a crazy statistic.
Well, yeah, but at the same time, do we need to be careful, I think, of kind of high quality migrants that are coming in, including returning Irish, with permits and so on, and what's actually coming in behind.
Of course, yeah. I do think that's another thing. Like we can go back to, people get caught on illegal immigration and they see that as like the be all end all, and you can get everyone to agree on that illegal immigration is terrible. Most people would be like, yeah, we shouldn't have illegal immigration. The other side of the coin is legal immigration. How do we deal with that? Because at the moment, was it last year, 149,000 people came in. I think 86,000 of them were non-EU migrants. And if they're non-EU migrants, they're more diverse than the population here. So they might have frictions and different ideologies. But I think it's 86,000 people, non-EU coming. You could clear out all of Galway City. That's, for anyone listening, that's Bohermore, Salt Hill, Knocknacarra. Clear it all out and just fill it with non-EU migrants that came last year. Staggering numbers. That's legal.
Well, it is. I mean, but the issue really is that if you look at the Irish model, for me anyway, just having done some research, and then you compare it against the Danish model.
Yeah.
I mean, It's just extraordinary what we've done. I mean, we're taking people, we're putting them into these locations. We don't know who they are. They're coming in from countries that have no affinity. They're not brought in for any economic reason, and yet they're here for that reason. And that the domestic Irish families who are looking for these benefits can't get them. We have a massive housing problem, and then we're being told that that there's no connection between all of the numbers that have come in and the housing problem.
It's crazy, isn't it? Like in England, a low-skilled non-EU migrant will never contribute to the state throughout its lifetime. A lot of the time, they'll cost the state around £200,000 to £300,000, which is just staggering. And it's a drain on the economy, which they think these migrants are propping up. The other side to it is this iPass system. We've created a business model that encourages refugees to come into the country. So you have people who now, their business model is to make sure there's refugees coming in. And what are they going to do? Keep funding the NGOs that stand outside and protest, asking for more.
Well, Nick, can I come back to you there? I mean, it seems to me that you've got the numbers on a lot of the iPass centres, companies setting up out of nowhere with people that we don't know about, with very little capital, and suddenly they have multi-million contracts with the state. I hope to be talking later to Malachy Steenson about the rally in Dublin, and I know there's more to come. But it just seems to me that the political establishment, and as we can see from the vote to join the compact, the EU Compact Treaty, are simply completely disconnected from the Irish people. Is there an argument here that the Irish people themselves should be looking at what Irish people are engaged in making money from these iPass centres and boycott them?
Yeah, well, I think that's happening in a lot of places. Again, going back to Monaghan, there was the meeting in Carrickmacross last week. I wasn't at it, but I talked to a lot of people that were. And, the high-profile names are effectively being boycotted in the town. But what I've also learned is that because they're making so much money, they also are able to set up other types of businesses, whether they're construction or property, adjacent, that they'll end up building social houses or whatever. So they end up employing a lot of people. And because of some of them have celebrity GEA status, they still get by on that. And then most people that are profiting from it are, not well-known businessmen. They're hotel owners. They could be just cowboy businessmen that are setting up. But I agree with everything that Michael just said there about this is a business. I call it the immigration industrial complex. Everything is being incentivized for people to set up these iPass centres. In the UK last week, the Sunday Times, in their rich list, there was a first billionaire iPass, the migrant hotel king, I think they call him, and he's now a billionaire from doing it in the UK. But there is a shift happening, and you mentioned the EU Migration Pact. Just last week, the Dutch government, so the Netherlands, they brought out a white paper or a policy paper saying that they want to opt out of the Migration Pact and how they want to reduce levels of asylum. And they're presenting this to Europe, and Europe are not very happy. Let's put it that way, because this is a fundamental part of their EU membership. They don't have the same opt-out clause that we do, and that Denmark did, or that Poland does. So when you start stacking it up, if England, the UK have also, obviously Starmer had his announcement today, they're getting tough on this. So if you now have the UK, Sweden, Denmark, the Netherlands, Poland, and Hungary, so that's 6. 5 are in the UK, 5 are in the EU. Starting to get tough on this. The Germany, obviously, there's a swell of a movement there. So is the tide starting to turn? I don't know. I'm kind of hopeful. I think Starmer's speech today, for the first time ever, I was like, wow, I'm impressed with Keir Starmer of what he said. Now, they can say one thing and do another, so I'm not naive either. But, for the first time, I'm hearing the kind of rhetoric that I wanted to hear.
But isn't that inevitable from the results of the European elections last year, when there was a shift in the Overton window, the acceptable extremes for the public more to the right, back to the centre, but being pulled to the right by the right. And as a consequence of that, the politicians who typically lead from behind with their antennae up, and if there's a shift in the public mood in that window, this is inevitable. The problem we've got, though, is that the actual numbers that have come in are in. I mean, the number of people that have been deported and forced deportation out of Ireland, I think, is less than 100 from the numbers I looked at. Our data is very poor before 2022, so it's very unreliable.
Yeah, just my quick 2 cents on deportations is that, ultimately mass deportations don't work, and they're very dangerous, and they can cause a lot of harm, if you go back through history. But voluntary deportations, creating incentives for people to leave, cutting off welfare and things like that. But Ireland, we're new to this. We haven't been doing this for 10 or 20 years. We've only been doing it for the last 2. So I just keep saying, if we just stop the numbers coming, most of our problems will be solved, pretty quickly. But whereas in the UK, they've accepted so many people over basically 50 years. They're in a totally different place than we are. But some people might disagree with me on that. Some people are all for mass deportations and things like that.
Well, it's easy to say that. I totally recognise your point. Sorry, you're suggesting then that in order to deal with the damage limitation and the basis of what has come in, that really, is a problem for us, that we would have to incentivise them to leave, which means paying them upfront cash and asking them to go.
Well, Denmark did something like that. They had this voluntary deportations, yes, and so it works to an extent. But what scares me is the rate of the people coming and the rate of money we're spending on iPass. Like, that's just not sustainable. I just want that to be cut, and if we cut that dramatically, with as soon as possible, things won't be too bad. We can get on with things. Like, there's a lot of people here. Ireland is an incredibly rich country. There's 6 million people on the island now, maybe 7. We're so rich that we have the money and resources to take care of absolutely everyone on this island. I'm pretty confident in saying that. But you have to make it a strict society where there are rules. People that commit crimes go to prison. All these kind of things that aren't happening. And create high levels of trust. But some people, if you're a violent criminal and you're currently applying for your citizenship here or for asylum, and you commit a crime, like, you should not have a right to be in the country.
And Steph, are you seeing that? I mean, Nick has picked up the point there about a change in mood now being reflected in political speeches, at least, whatever about action. But on the other hand, of course, we actually see the European Union pushing us hard on hate speech bills, which are directly connected to this whole area. I mean, that's what they're there. They're there to say anything we say is accurate and anything you say is disinformation and misinformation, and we can create a lot of pain for you. But do you see? Are you detecting a change yourself on the ground in terms of the numbers that are responding to what you're doing and the type of comments that are coming forward?
So this is definitely, there's been a change, but it's very possible to be very pessimistic about this, because exactly your suspicion that these people can say whatever they want, but will they actually do it is the main thing. And the fundamental problem, even though there is a large rise in, I guess you could call it, populist energy or rejection from the immune system of the people for this plan, if you so will. And this is the English, for example, have never voted in a majority for the type of migration that you're seeing, never once in their 50 years, but it was done to them anyway, because that was the plan, And this is our problem. This is a political issue where we have a network of people, for whatever reason, are incentivized or brought together in this crusading project where they want to reforge the West into a different vision. This was actually revealed pretty clearly when you saw USAID with Elon Musk and Doge, when they showed that the infrastructure of the world hegemon, which is the American state, with all the money, the massive military, all this, they were projecting a giant amount of power out into the world to reforge the world into this utopian vision of whatever you want to call it. And this has been the plan. Now, I think the critical thing to really get into people's heads is that the thing that is missing is the sort of self-love, I guess you could say, that is within a nationalist, if you want to put it this way. And I'll give you some very, very clear examples of this for Ireland, because talking about big states like America can be kind of frustrating because we're so small. But look at Dubai. Dubai is about 4 million people inside of it. Now, Dubai has been more great replaced than Ireland has by a significant margin. Dubai has only 11% of their population, they're as bad as Belgium. Mike brought up Belgium there a minute ago. The Dubai Arab natives have an 11% population. The other 88% or 89% or whatever it is, they're all foreigners. They're all not Dubai natives. They're not Arabs. But these Dubai natives have a 3.5 fertility rate. They get third level university. They get subsidized petrol. They get their first house is given to them without a mortgage, where they give it a mortgage with no interest or something like this. They have all these enormous benefits that make their life so easy. So even though they're in a like crushingly scary minority where you have like this huge thing of immigrants, you know, and there's loads of us that go over there as well, they have no fear because the purpose of their stay is to serve them. They build the Dubai stay to make the Arabs succeed and them win. And as a consequence, their fertility is through the roof and they're doing very well. Singapore is another brilliant example. You can look at them. They're a small country, like a bit bigger than Ireland, but they're like ran really, really well. And it's done with the intention to make Singapore win. Now you come to the West, you look at what was going on with USAID, you look at what was going on, the psychosis within liberalism in general. And the purpose of our states is to get hate speech laws, to do what we call anti-white propaganda, to lambast and shame the native populations and beat them into submission and kind of parasite off them. And then I guess you could say help outsiders in some type of way. And it's this actually self-hate thing that really causes the psychological problem that leads to all of this. So our big regime problem, our big political problem is that if we want anything to change, we'll need to see that significant difference happen, where we're reforging and building our states for us. Like Ireland could be such a powerful state if we took a Dubai attitude and a bit of an American futurist attitude. If we were thinking like, should we start to nudge into nuclear power? Should we use the giant marine territory that we have to maybe explore like oil or something like this? Should we start to maybe work on our technology and capacity that we have and maybe get into the AI game or something like this? I'm not quite sure, but we could do so much, but we don't, because the purpose of our state right now is to essentially push the Irish out of the way and participate in this money grab that a lot of people are doing. So our political problem is very, very serious, but there's lots of models out there like Dubai, all various other ones that are hugely successful, but it involves the one great taboo, the moral taboo, which is actually caring about yourself and caring about your people and building your state for that purpose instead of a sort of a free-for-all for everyone else in the world. And that's the great sin, and that's what we're trying to work on. So yeah, well, I hope that wasn't too indirect.
No, it wasn't. No, but I mean, just to help you along there, I mean, the big issue in terms of the model we're under is, like Ireland, I would describe the Irish government as a Vichy government. Not for the first time. I was describing it as that in 2012 as well. And the reason for that is that Ursula von der Leyen, who's, as you know, is the EU chief, she was on the board of trustees of the World Economic Forum, and the World Economic Forum official policy is to implement stakeholder capitalism. And stakeholder capitalism means that you surround Parliament with NGOs, which you fund. They're shouting the policy. The politicians are just become managers of the policies that are created. And then, of course, you have the corporate arm and you have the permanent establishment, the civil servants and so on. And the people don't get in other words, it's a replacement model for representative democracy, and that's what we've got, unfortunately, from what I can see. And that's why I think that the focus on what we're talking about, which is social media engagement, getting people to wake up, and then the rallies on the streets and all the rest of it seems to be the only way to go. Because I mean, if we're waiting for Europe to come up with a solution to a problem that it has created, we'll be waiting quite a while. And even though I would like to be optimistic about it, politicians will say whatever is necessary, to keep the show on the road. But ultimately, if the problem that has been created is going to come back onto them, it's just going to be presentational rather than real. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. Sorry, was there something? Was that Julia? Go ahead, yeah.
I was just going to say, Eddie, that like a lot of people find this very difficult to like conceptualize, like what would change actually look like, and it's it is a very extreme thing. But again, you have Dubai; it is a complete, total migration plan to serve the state, and you have to look at that and say, the only thing that is sort of functionally different, because they're more extreme than all of us, the only thing that's functionally different is the purpose of the state is to serve their people. And that's the one thing that you see missing over here in the West. Well, like in Ireland, we don't have anywhere near the numbers they have. I think that we've only got like 15% of a foreign population. Look how much chaos this is causing because people like Nick are exposing the idea that this is actually a parasitic project on the Irish taxpayer. And that's the thing that just sends people crazy, you know? So if you can get that flip psychologically, that change, that what is the purpose of what we're doing here is about creating something for us. That's a big one, but I don't know. Is that going to come anytime soon? Can we expect politicians
Well, I mean,
to do that?
yeah, this time last year, when there was Dáil debates on the EU Migration Pact, there was only a handful of TDs in the chamber actually debating it. Only a handful. I mean, like 10 to 12. They just weren't serious about it. No, they turned up in large numbers for the vote itself, and of course it went through, I think, with 7 or 9 votes clear. But I mean, it's quite extraordinary that we actually handed over our borders to unelected, bureaucrats in Brussels that can actually deliver quotas to us and say, you must take in this number of people. We're being told to expect 15,000, but the actual real preparations for 24,000 when you look at the detail, and it's just been done without any recourse to the Irish people. There was no referendum, and that's the very point. That's stakeholder capitalism in operation. And when you look at the investments people are making behind the IPAS centres, well, that's corporate investment. And when you look at the pressure coming in on the land banks from the outside, well, that's again more corporate pressure from where individual Irish people trying to get into the housing market are being pushed aside by the massive spending power that's going on by these big international land bank companies. And that all goes back to the same source. That's the point, So, it's a big issue, and I know it's very hard for people to get their heads around, but all the information is out there. What's not there at the moment is enough people willing to engage with the information and to grasp it and to wake up to what's on our doorstep. Michael, can I just ask you, in terms of the reaction that you're getting to the video clips that you're doing, are you finding a change in the reaction you're getting to it?
There's a huge market there. People love the content because it speaks to them. It's something they've wanted to say. A lot of the messages I get are like, thank you. I thought I was alone in my thinking. Turns out there's hundreds of thousands of us out there. Like 4 months into starting, it was 115 million views in 30 days and 21 million accounts reached. That's a crazy number of people watching the content and agreeing with it. I would say 95% are good comments, and then you'd have 5% that are bad.
And you started doing this quite recently, didn't you? You just tell me a little bit about that story. You were in sales and marketing and in the construction industry.
Yeah, so started off in construction for 7 years. Then did a mental health course company, did that for 2 years while I travelled during COVID. So we started just travelling the world during COVID because obviously the restrictions here, and went back into construction, and then travelled a bit more. And then when I came back here, I kind of wanted to do something,
But what was the spark that got you straight into this? Because you're right in the middle of it now.
It was the frustration. I suppose I was looking around and I just wanted more of that media presence here in Ireland. And it just came to you. You're thinking, why isn't it there? And then I'm like, wait a minute, I'm 29 years of age at the time, 29-year-old man, who am I waiting to do it? So I said I might as well.
Well, that's because, I'm sure, just to bring in Nick again on this, there was a complete desertion of the Irish people, wasn't there, in the start of COVID? Journalism has become more like propaganda. I open newspapers now just to see how bad it's after getting. And it's just a constant attack on the undesirables, the unmentionables as they might see it, which was just ordinary Irish people. It's quite clear from those that come out in the rallies, these are ordinary Irish families walking with their children, expressing their deep concern about what's going on in their communities. And they're being labelled by their own national media, by the editors of those newspapers, who basically, were bailed out by the state during the COVID years. It hasn't changed. Is that too harsh a judgment?
Yeah, exactly. No, it's not. COVID was a wake-up call for an awful lot of people, including myself. It gave people time to, away from their job, or to actually read or look at what's going on around in the world. And it was a strange time. Some people bought it hook, line, and sinker, and then other people were like, "What's going on? This is ridiculous," and it shed a light on things. And it was a pivotal point for everything. Like I started creating content during that time. I think other people are similar. And even look at Trump's tariff wars. Like that whole thing is because of realization during COVID that supply chains were very fragile. And that you need to onshore a lot of things. So COVID was a huge thing, and we're still not over the total impacts of it, whether you're talking about the actual disease or where it originated from, and all sorts of things. But from an Irish point of view, yes, it completely it became crystal clear how entrenched our media is. Like, and it's getting to the stage where it's laughable, and
Yeah.
like the control that certain political parties have over RTE. People are now pretty much okay to say that RTE is just another arm of Fine Gael, and it's not too far wrong. Like, we'll never be allowed on the TV. And it's just ridiculous. But thank God for social media. Thank God for Elon Musk buying X, because now you can say what you want. And the success of Michael or Uberboyo, and your podcast, all of us, like, we're gaining a lot of followers. Like, I would argue that a simple video that any of us put up gets more views and more interactions than the Late Late Show, and we're doing it for free. And the Late Late Show has a budget of millions. So there's a lot at stake here, and they're not playing the social media game well. It doesn't come naturally to them. They're not able to do it because they can't report honestly on things, and that because we're allowed to have opinions, it's a premium to content, because people want to hear and read original opinions, whether they're right or wrong. They just want to know that the person talking is saying what they truly feel.
Well, I mean, I don't think the Liberal left are going to change their position too quick. I mean, if you look, for example, at the just to the end of last year, we had Luke O'Neill, being interviewed with Pat Kenny, saying, it was definitely the bat what done it when it came to the pandemic, that this bat had flown 1,000 kilometres across China, didn't land anywhere, and just swooped into the wet market in Wuhan and bit some Pangolian, that bit some Chinaman. And as far as he was concerned, that this is stacking up. Well, should we concede that it's nonsense? I mean, it's been investigated, and there's huge payments of money that went from USAID over to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and we know it was part of the American bioweapons industry and all of that. So what I'm saying is that, from my perspective, what I see is a bunch of editors, and I know them. I see a bunch of presenters. It's the same voices all the time, and they're now engaged. As far as I'm concerned, they're simply engaged in Operation Cover-Up because of the scale of what they'll face otherwise. So, listen, I don't want to extend this inaugural discussion too much further, but is there anything you haven't said that you'd like to say? I'll just ask each one of you that question, starting with you, Uberboyo.
Well, look, something that you're speaking about there with the USAID one is a interesting question, and like COVID and everything like this, because again, these are just examples of grand, coordinated global projects, and they are clearly well funded, and they're clearly showing you that the political ruling elite, if you so will, they are coordinated, and they have their big crusades that define their lives, and we live through them. And I was pointing out Dubai earlier, their political elite have a very specific intention which aligns with their people. And you could call that a nationalist project, ironically. And then over here, it seems like we don't have this. So what is our big issue is it seems to be this, it's almost like a hostility from our political elite, if you so will. And the people who usually get into places like the Dáil and stuff like this, they are obviously just servants to those larger goals. It doesn't seem like there's any will inside of the Irish nation, the Irish national political system, to stand on its own feet and resist these macro trends, because there's just too much money. The brown envelopes, not even that, but just explicitly getting paid, like salaries and stuff like this, incentives, iPass contracts, they're just so big that it's so difficult for people to sort of say, I don't want to bite the hand that feeds, this type of thing. And I often say this to left wingers, because I'll speak to left wingers and they'll call you a maniac, and they'll call people all sorts of things. But you would speak to them, and their world model is that there's this group of capitalist billionaire bankers that are destroying the world, and these bankers want us to hate homosexual people and want us to hate black people so they can cause race confusion in order for us to be confused while they exploit us all with money and all this. And I just find it so fascinating, because if you sort of say to yourself, well, how would you form a coherent political way to resist this? Obviously, the first thing you would come to is you would need a team that doesn't bicker and doesn't fight. And that brings you immediately to the idea of a nation, of a national project. And again, in Ireland's history, it's so interesting how everybody's so proud of Irish history, and we love the fact that we have our nation, and we all hate the English, as they say. But this isn't that exactly the definition of our situation. There's this giant global, you could even say Anglo-American empire. It's an Anglo empire. It's projecting out this moral crusade. You might say it's a little bit toxic right now. Now they're doing different things over there, so it's not, obviously, it's very, very nuanced. But we have our little nation, and we're caught in the ruckus of this. And it seems like an awful lot of our political system is possessed by interlopers. And we want to say to ourselves, how do we actually make this state about serving ourselves as opposed to being an exploitation racket? And it's funny, because that mental model is the obvious position you'd expect people to be. That's what the purpose of Irish nationalism is. That was the purpose of this nation. But it seems like a lot of the left just don't want to go there. They consider that some type of cardinal evil. They want to support the propaganda of the current regime, if you so will. Yeah. And they don't have the imagination, the open-mindedness to look at somewhere like Dubai or Singapore, or like reconsider these situations. So
well, I agree with all that. I mean, the extraordinary thing about the opposition in Ireland is that the actual main opposition party, Sinn Féin, are even loathed more than the actual government parties, which takes takes some going. Nick, was there anything you wanted to add just before I wrap? And I'll go to Michael.
Yeah, no, I agree with a lot of that. You can take a lot of lessons from Dubai and Qatar and these Gulf states, and I do think we should raise the bar to what it means to get citizenship. Like it's commonly said that the Irish passport is the best passport in the world, but yet if you actually break it down, we're the easiest passport to attain citizenship rights, definitely in Europe.
You've spoken at length in the past about Denmark. Surely that's the model that we should be looking most closely at.
Yeah, people say, Nick, are you left or are you right? And I'm like, I don't actually really care. I just want a country that works. And so that's like a competent government. Denmark seem to have a very competent government. They have the Social Democrats. So I often say I'm a Danish Social Democrat. They have very good freedom of speech, very strict immigration laws. They basically deconstructed their version of RTE in 2017, and focused on independent media. But then on the right, Uberboyo mentioned it earlier. Singapore is very right-leaning country. They don't have very good freedom of speech laws in Singapore, but they have an excellent. They do everything else excellently because they're public transport, education, everything. So I actually don't care. I will live happily in a Singapore style or Danish style. But what makes it work is that you need competent, really good people in government. And so that's why I'm doing this, because I'm like, look, my over thing is like, we don't have a housing crisis. We don't have an immigration crisis. We have a political crisis, because the people in power, dropped out of journalism after a year, or, our head of AI, our minister for AI has never used ChatGPT. These are real stories. So my thing I'd like to say to everyone is just, if you're watching this, know that none of your family are, none of your best friends are, you're actually niche enough, and you need to educate those around you. So, there's an onus on you. If you know about this stuff, you got to educate people.
Finally, Michael, isn't that the point, that each one of us really is trying to wake up what I call a nap, a nearly awake person, and get them on side with all this material?
Yeah, and I see it changing. Like, you go back 2 years ago, and if you were to bring up any of the topics we would have talked about here today,
you'd be shot.
oh,
Yeah, you'd be shot.
they don't want to hear it. They wouldn't want to hear it. Now, today, I say you can go into most households, bring up immigration, and you're going to get the same opinion. If there's too much, it needs to be dialed back. That's why I have a very positive outlook on it, because I do see things moving in the right direction. I wouldn't have said the same thing just last year, this time last year. Now I actually see things changing. And it's because of work like yourself and all this that goes into it, Nick, Uberboyo, and everyone else involved.
But isn't it also because of the change in America with the whole Trump thing?
Yeah.
I mean, that was a big wind of change that came across the North Atlantic.
100%, yeah.
So it's not all bad. Some of it is good.
Some of it's good.
Yeah.
And I do think we're, like, some stuff coming up, like the EU hate speech stuff, that's there lingering in the background. But I do believe we have this movement growing and growing that we should be able to challenge things that come along like that.
Well, listen, we're going to leave it at that. I'm going to leave it at that for this section of Counterpoint, because my next interview will be with Malachi Steenson, and I'm going to pick it up precisely there. Thanks for listening.